Some days are just perfect. The sun is high, the sky is a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the sound of laughter is everywhere. For the Miller family, it was supposed to be one of those days. A lazy Saturday afternoon at their community pool, a reward for a long, hard week. They had earned this peace. They had earned this slice of suburban calm in the neighborhood they helped build. But peace can be incredibly fragile. Sometimes, all it takes is one person, armed with suspicion and a prejudice they can't shake, to shatter it completely. This is a story about what happens when that kind of entitlement crashes head-on into a reality it wasn't ready for. It's about a woman who saw a black family enjoying themselves and decided, right then and there, that they didn't belong. She was so confident, so certain she was right, that she decided to get the authorities involved. She wanted to make an example of them. And, well, an example was definitely made. Just not the one she was expecting. Hook. This woman thought she had the upper hand when she called the cops on a black family at her community pool. What she didn't know. The man she was harassing was the guy who signs the police department's checks. And the body cam footage is just savage. This isn't just a story about instant karma, it's a brutal lesson in what happens when you try to weaponize authority against the very person who holds it. Stick around, because the fallout from this woman's call is something you have to see to believe. Section 1, The Setup, A Perfect Day Interrupted. The Oakmont Reserve subdivision was the kind of place you see on lifestyle magazine covers. We're talking manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and a sense of orderly calm that was almost sterile. Its pride and joy was the community clubhouse and pool, a resort-style oasis that residents paid some hefty HOA fees to enjoy. On this sweltering July afternoon, the pool was dotted with families. The air smelled like sunscreen and chlorine, the official scent of summer. Among them was Councilman David Miller, his wife, Jessica, and their two young kids, 7-year-old Maya and 9-year-old Leo. For David, these moments were precious. His life was a blur of city council meetings, budget committees, and constituent calls. He was a true public servant, a man who had worked his way up from community organizer to one of the most respected figures in city government. He was known for his calm head, his sharp mind, and his deep commitment to fairness. But today, he wasn't Councilman Miller. He was just Dad, the guy whose only jobs were to reapply sunscreen and toss a football in the shallow end. Jessica was kicked back on a lounge chair, a wide-brimmed hat shielding her face as she watched the kids play. She was a successful architect, a woman whose vision had literally shaped parts of the city's skyline. They'd moved to Oakmont Reserve 3 years ago, drawn by the promise of a safe, family-friendly community and good schools. By all accounts, they were ideal residents. They paid their dues on time, kept their property perfect, and always showed up for community events. They belonged here. But not everyone saw it that way. From across the pool, a woman named Susan was watching. Let's call her the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood standards. In her mind, she was the gatekeeper of Oakmont's prestige. She was in her late 50s, with a severe blonde bob and an expression that seemed permanently stuck on disappointed. She was perched on her lounge chair like a hawk, scanning the area not for fun, but for infractions. A towel on the ground, a kid running on the concrete, a radio playing a bit too loud, Susan saw everything. She had clocked the Millers the second they arrived. She didn't recognize them. Now, in a community with over 300 homes, that's not really unusual. But to Susan, their presence just felt wrong. It didn't fit her mental image of an Oakmont family. For the first hour, she just watched, her suspicion brewing. She saw them laughing. She saw David lift his squealing daughter into the air. She saw Jessica share a bag of fruit snacks. It was a picture of pure family joy. And to Susan, it was deeply, fundamentally suspicious. Her first move was classic passive aggression. She stood up, walked to the edge of the pool, and started loudly reading the giant sign listing the pool rules, glancing over at the Millers as she emphasized, all guests must be accompanied by a resident at all times. They didn't even seem to notice, totally lost in their own world. That just threw gasoline on the fire. She felt ignored. Her non-existent authority had been challenged. She marched back to her chair, jaw tight, her mind racing, building this whole narrative of trespassing and rule-breaking. They must have snuck in, she thought. Or they're guests of a resident who isn't even here. The possibilities, all confirming her bias, just swirled. She pulled out her phone, not to relax, but to document. She sneakily took a few pictures of the family, zooming right in on their faces. Evidence, she thought. She was building her case. The perfect family day was about to be put on trial, and Susan had appointed herself judge, jury, and prosecutor. Section 2, the confrontation, the escalation of entitlement. So, with her evidence gathered and her self-righteousness meter cranked to 11, Susan decided it was time to act. The passive-aggressive routine didn't work. Time for a direct confrontation. She stood, wrapped a towel around her waist, and marched across the hot concrete, her flip-flops slapping with each aggressive step. She stopped right in front of David, who was now sitting on the edge of the pool, feet in the water, watching his kids swim. She just stood there for a second, hands on her hips, waiting. David, sensing someone towering over him, looked up with a polite, questioning smile. "Can I help you?" Susan's face was a grim mask. "I'm going to need to see your pool passes," she demanded. Not a request. An order. David's smile faltered a bit. "I'm sorry." "Your pool passes," she repeated, talking slowly like he was an idiot. "The HOA requires all residents to carry their amenity cards. And if you're guests, the resident who signed you in needs to be here." Jessica, hearing the tone, sat up and slid off her sunglasses. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice calm but with a protective sting. Susan glanced at Jessica, giving her a dismissive once-over. "The problem is I don't recognize you. I've lived here for 10 years, I know everyone, and I've never seen you before." Of course, that was a lie. She didn't know everyone. But in her head, she knew everyone who was supposed to be there. David stayed cool, but his eyes were sharp now. He was used to dealing with confrontational people at work, but he never expected it here. In his sanctuary. In front of his kids. "We live on Cedar Lane," he said simply, hoping to shut this down. "We've been here for 3 years." Susan scoffed. A short, ugly sound. "I doubt that very much. People like you don't usually live in Oakmont Reserve." And there it was. The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. People like you. The subtext wasn't subtext anymore. David felt that familiar knot tighten in his stomach, a feeling he had hoped his kids would never have to see. He saw his son, Leo, stop in the water, looking over at them, his face worried. David took a slow, deliberate breath. He would not give her the satisfaction of a reaction. "What exactly do you mean by people like us?" he asked, his voice steady. Susan actually looked flustered for a second. "Oh, you know what I mean. This is a private community. For residents. And since you're clearly not residents, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Now." "And if we don't?" Jessica asked, her voice now ice cold. She stood and walked over to her husband, a united front. "If you don't," Susan said, her confidence surging back as she reached for her trump card, "I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing." The threat was out. Other families around the pool were starting to notice. Conversations died down. People shifted uncomfortably. David knew his rights. He knew he didn't owe this woman a thing. But he also knew the danger of a police call based on a false, racially motivated report. He'd seen how quickly these things can spiral. "Ma'am, you are making a very serious accusation," David said, his voice low and firm. "I'm telling you, as calmly as I can, that my family and I are residents. We have every right to be here. You are harassing us in front of our children, and I'm asking you, respectfully, to walk away and leave us alone." For any rational person, this was the off-ramp. David had given her an out. He was polite, articulate, non-threatening. But Susan wasn't rational. Her worldview had been challenged, and she couldn't back down. To her, his calm authority wasn't a sign of respectability, it was arrogance. How dare he? "I'm not going anywhere," she spat, her face turning red. "I'm protecting this community. You've had your chance." With a dramatic flourish, she yanked her smartphone out of her pocket. Her fingers, shaking with a mix of rage and adrenaline, stabbed at the screen. She was actually doing it. She was calling 911. The perfect day was officially over. As Susan held the phone to her ear, a smug look settled on her face. She had played her trump card. In her world, calling the police was a tool to enforce her social order. She turned her back on the Millers slightly, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. 911, what is your emergency? Hello? Yes, I'd like to report a trespassing in progress, Susan said, her voice dripping with fake urgency. I'm at the community pool in Oakmont Reserve. Okay, ma'am, can you describe the situation? Yes, there's a group of people here who are refusing to leave, she said, choosing her words carefully. They've become very aggressive and hostile. I've asked for proof of residency, and they've refused. I'm concerned for my safety. David and Jessica just looked at each other in disbelief. Aggressive? Hostile? She was just straight up lying, inventing a threat to get the cops here faster. It's a classic, ugly tactic, crank up the drama to get a response. The operator asked, "Can you describe the individuals, ma'am?" Susan paused for dramatic effect. It's a man and a woman, with 2 small children. They're African American. She whispered the last part like it was the key detail that explained everything. And you're saying they're acting aggressively, the operator pressed. Yes, very. Susan insisted. The man, especially. He became very belligerent. I'm worried about what he might do. David just shook his head slowly, deeply disappointed. He'd spent his career trying to build trust between communities and law enforcement. And here was this woman, tearing it all down with a few malicious lies, turning the very system he worked in against his family. Filing a false police report is a crime, but Susan was so blinded by prejudice, she probably thought she was being a hero. The operator told her officers were on the way. Oh, I will, Susan said, hanging up with a triumphant tap. She turned back to the Millers. The police are on their way. We'll see who belongs here now. She retreated to her lounge chair like a queen returning to her throne, waiting for her cavalry. The whole vibe at the pool was ruined. Some families, clearly uncomfortable, quietly packed up and left. The Miller kids, now out of the pool, stood close to their mom, their joy replaced with confusion. Leo looked at his father. Dad, why did that lady call the police on us? David knelt down. Because, son, sometimes people judge others without knowing them. They let fear make their decisions. But don't you worry. We haven't done anything wrong. Everything's going to be okay. I promise. It was a promise he fully intended to keep. After about 15 minutes that felt like an hour, 2 police cruisers pulled into the parking lot. 2 officers, Evans and Chen, walked through the main gate. They were young, professional, and their faces were neutral, trained to read a scene. But their presence instantly changed the space. It was no longer a place to relax, it was a potential crime scene. Susan shot up from her chair, waving them over. Officers. Over here. Thank you for coming so quickly. They approached her first, since she was the one who called. "Ma'am, you called about a disturbance?" Officer Evans asked. "Yes, that family, right there," she said, pointing a stiff finger at the Millers. "They're trespassing. They became hostile when I confronted them. I told them to leave, but they refused. I was afraid." Officer Evans and Officer Chen exchanged a quick, professional look. They'd heard calls like this 100 times. Usually, it's just a misunderstanding. Their job is to de-escalate and figure out if a crime was actually committed. Studies show that's how most of these calls end, with officers just mediating a dispute. Officer Evans nodded. "Okay, ma'am. Let us go talk to them. Please stay here." He and Officer Chen then walked toward the Miller family. For any black family in America, the sight of two uniformed officers approaching because of an accusation is never a neutral event. It's loaded with history and danger. David stood slightly in front of his wife and kids. He watched them approach, his face calm. He knew this was the critical moment. He made a conscious decision: he wouldn't show his city council Idaho. Not yet. He wanted to see how the system he helped manage would treat him as a regular guy. The test was about to begin. Section 4, the climax, the body cam reveal. "Good afternoon, folks," Officer Evans said, his tone professional. "We got a call about a disturbance. Can you tell us what's going on?" The second officer, Chen, stood slightly to the side. On her uniform was a small, black box with a blinking green light, a body camera, recording every word, every move. David met the officer's gaze. "Good afternoon, officer," he replied, his voice steady. "There's no disturbance. My family and I are enjoying the pool. That woman," he nodded towards Susan, "accused us of not belonging here. When we told her we are residents, she called you. The reporting party says you were asked for proof of residency and refused." "That's right," David said. "With all due respect, officer, she's another resident, not an employee. We don't have to show her our ID. She was aggressive, and frankly, her accusations were racially motivated." That phrase, racially motivated, just hung there. A serious charge. "Okay, I understand," Officer Evans said. "But we're here now, so we need to sort this out. Do you have any ID that shows your residence? A driver's license with a local address, an HOA card?" This was it. David could have argued the point, but he saw the fear in his kids' eyes. The fastest way to end this was to comply. "Of course," David said. "I'm just reaching into my bag for my wallet." He pulled out a leather wallet, opened it, and took out his driver's license. As he did, another card slipped out from behind it. He handed just the driver's license to Officer Evans. The officer examined it. Name, David Miller. Address, 114, Cedar Lane, right here in Oakmont Reserve. The entire reason for this call just evaporated. He looked up, already annoyed at the waste of time. "Okay, Mr. Miller. This address is in the neighborhood. Looks like a big misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Jessica cut in, her voice firm. "It was harassment. We were targeted." Before Evans could respond, his partner, Officer Chen, who had a better angle on the wallet, took a step forward. Her eyes were locked on that second card. The official city seal was unmistakable. "Sir," Officer Chen said, her voice suddenly different. It had a new note of shock and deference. "The other card in your wallet. Is that your city ID?" David glanced down. "Oh. Yes, it is." Officer Evans looked from his partner to David, confused. "Your city ID?" Slowly, deliberately, David Miller reached back into his wallet and pulled out the second card. He held it out. There it was, in clear, official print. David A. Miller. City Councilman. Chair, Public Safety and Police Oversight Committee. The silence was absolute. The sounds of the pool just faded away. Officer Evans's eyes went wide. He looked from the ID to David's face and back again. The gears were spinning. Councilman Miller. The guy from the budget hearings. The guy whose committee oversees, well, them. In a very real way, one of their ultimate bosses. His whole demeanor changed instantly. The professional detachment melted into horrified recognition. His face flushed. Sir. Councilman Miller. He stammered, completely lost. He looked at his partner, who just gave a slight, almost invisible shake of her head. Susan, watching from a distance, saw the officer's body language completely shift. She saw them straighten up, saw them looking at David not like a suspect, but like a boss. A knot of dread started twisting in her stomach. What was going on? David slid his ID back into his wallet, his expression unreadable. Officers, he said, his voice quiet but carrying immense weight. This woman knowingly filed a false police report based on race. She lied to a 911 operator, claimed we were hostile, and wasted valuable city resources, pulling you away from real emergencies. She terrorized my children. I want her removed from this pool. Permanently. Officer Evans found his voice. Yes, sir. Of course, sir. Right away. He turned on his heel, his face a mask of grim resolve, and marched directly toward Susan. The plot twist had landed. And it was savage. Section 5, The Fallout, Justice is Served. That walk across the pool deck was a walk of pure nightmare for Susan. She saw the looks on the officers' faces, no longer helpful, but cold and furious. She stood up nervously. Is everything taken care of? She asked, her voice trembling. Ma'am, I need you to gather your things. You're leaving, Officer Evans said, his voice completely flat. Susan was stunned. What? Leaving? But they're the trespassers. No, ma'am, Officer Chin cut in sharply. They are residents. You, however, just filed a false police report. That's a crime. In fact, several states have passed laws specifically to make racially motivated 911 calls illegal, with penalties including fines and even jail time. False report. I told you what happened. Susan shrieked. You told us a resident of this community, who happens to be a city councilman, was a hostile trespasser, Officer Evans shot back. Do you have any idea the trouble you're in? The color drained from Susan's face. City councilman. The words just didn't compute. The man she tried to have arrested, was a powerful city official. The man who chaired the committee that oversaw the police. Councilman, she whispered. Yes. Councilman David Miller, Chin confirmed. And per his request, and with the full backing of the HOA rules you love so much, you're being permanently banned from this facility. If you set foot here again, you will be arrested for trespassing. Understand?